Hi, thank you very much. It's really great to be with you guys again. I think this is my fourth or fifth time presenting for you, and it's always a pleasure. This is a very lofty topic that I'm going to try to cover in 1 hour. So I'm going to get right to my slideshow presentation, which has a few videos embedded in it. So feel free to navigate your volume as necessary. And if you have any questions as the present or comments as you'd like to make during the course of the presentation, use the chat window. I'll try to address them as they come up. And maybe at the end, after the recording is over, I could take a couple of questions or comments at that point, about 8 o'clock. So here we go to Women of Science. I'm just going to go into my full screen. Now, yeah, I think Ellen, in answer to your question, the recording will probably be on the library website, I would assume. So we'll find that out afterwards. So, women's contributions to science go back a long way, and we're going to try to cover it going all the way back to the ancient world and also medieval Europe and the scientific revolution in the 16th and 17th centuries to the Industrial Revolution, where it was really very difficult for women to break in and be accepted in any scientific endeavor. But really, with the 20th century, that began to change. It really began to change in the 19th century, but broke through in the 20th century with the rise of modern medicine, computer engineering, and space exploration, all of which women have played enormous contributions towards, and in some cases have been the biggest advancers of these specific fields. So one of the reasons I began interested in this topic is because I'm a film historian, as you heard, and I found out about Hedy Lamarr and her amazing life story, and that kind of got me going down this rabbit hole. But she was an Austrian, Hungarian, and eventually American movie star and an inventor. She didn't have any formal training, but she was just a self-taught tinkerer who did things in her spare time. She was just like a MacGyver type of person, and so she created inventions like a traffic and improving the traffic stoplight, and a tablet that would dissolve in water to create flavored carbonated drinks. So she liked to invent things, and one of the things that she wanted to invent was a kind of radio transmission way to help the Allies basically sink Axis power U-boats. And this is a from a great PBS series, American Masters. And this technology that she would invent and for World War II would eventually be used in the modern consumer devices that we know as Bluetooth. So here is a little video from. I'm going to go to American Masters a few times because it's a great source of documentary or material.
One day in the summer of 1940, a shipload of children was torpedoed. All hands lost, including 83 children. At the time, the German U-boats were on the verge of winning the war. They seemed to be unsinkable because they easily outmaneuvered the outdated British torpedoes. In times of crisis, most of us feel powerless. But a few discover in themselves unexpected strength. And Hetty being Hetty, she said, I'm going to do something about that.
So in this article, Hetty says, I got the idea for my invention when I tried to think of some way to even the balance for the British. A radio-controlled torpedo, I thought, would do it.
A torpedo launched on a given trajectory might need to be changed, redirected. You want, ideally, your launching boat or your submarine to communicate with the torpedo.
The problem is you can't control radio communications. They're not secure.
Your enemy, if they're smart, finds the frequency with which you're talking to the torpedo and jams it.
Jamming. The Germans filled the air with radio interference. Interference.
She came up with the idea of a secret way of guiding that torpedo to the target that couldn't be interrupted, that couldn't be jammed, that couldn't be messed with. It was secret.
Instead of just one transmit frequency communicating, she said, what if we change those frequencies constantly in sync with each other? Frequency hopping.
You couldn't jam it because you'd only jam a split second of it in a single frequency. So frequency change, frequency hop, frequency hop, frequency hop.
That concept, secure radio communications, was brilliant.
So that's Hedy Lamarr, and that's just one of the women that we're going to talk about. We're going to go through dozens if I can get to them. So, really, as I mentioned, during the 19th century, women were mostly excluded from any scientific education. So they didn't, even if you had brilliant women, they really weren't given the opportunity to advance themselves in studies. So, the historical, critical, and sociological study of these issues itself has become an academic discipline in its own right. I'm going to skip this video. This is kind of an interesting video of nuclear scientists talking about the obstacles that they have to overcome, but I have so much to get to. I don't have time. I want to quickly go through the history of the world and women's involvement in the science in the sciences. So it's been recorded since the very earliest civilizations, going all the way back to Mesopotamia and Egypt. The earliest known recorded woman ever to be talked about was Pesachet, this Egyptian physician who was described as an overseer of female physicians in general. So she was the very first, and here you see a hieroglyph of her being spoken about. So in the ancient world, you had other healers and people who were in the in medicinal sciences. Agamede was cited by Homer as a healing physician about the time of the Trojan War, the Greek Trojan War. So the study of natural philosophy in ancient Greece was open to women, and there were astronomers, there were mathematicians. Theano was a mathematician and a physician, and various sources list her as the student, daughter, or wife of Pythagoras, of the famous Pythagorean theorem. And so, who knows? She was definitely in his circle she was in the circle of the Pythagoreans. Hypatia of Alexandria is a very well-known philosopher and astronomer, and she's really the earliest female mathematician about whom detailed information has survived. And she's credited with several important commentaries about geometry, algebra, and astronomy. And she headed a philosophical school where she taught many students. And in 415, she became entangled in a political dispute with Cyril, the Bishop of Alexandria, and the Roman governor. And it resulted in a mob of his supporters basically killing her and burning her to pieces. And this is an illustration done about what is suspected to have happened to her by the mob. So this is a French illustration. So there you go. I mean, so it was very difficult basically throughout history, and medieval Europe really, that was a bad time for science in general. It really marked the decline of the Roman Empire, and the Middle Ages left Europe with great difficulties because intellectual production just generally dropped because of the rise of Christianity. And there was less innovation and scientific inquiry. It was really the Arabic world at this time which is credited with preserving more of the scientific advancements. Um, but it was really in the Western world, convents and monasteries and nunneries really were the only places where women were allowed to read and continue any kind of skills in any capacity. So the scientific revolution, again, you'd think that maybe this would be a time for women to flourish, but it really wasn't. And it's sort of the period between Copernicus and his publication on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, talking about how the sun was the center of the solar system, which was a new idea at the time, all the way to the publication of the Principia, Isaac Newton's magnum opus, formulating the laws of motion and universal gravitation. But Margaret Cavendish was a 17th century figure of some importance, and she was involved with some of the debate, scientific debate at the time. But she wasn't allowed to join the English Royal Society. She was excluded from a lot of the institutions that the male scientists were involved with. But she did write a number of works on philosophy and natural. What was called natural philosophy was the wording of science. There really was no word for science at the time, but it was called natural philosophy. So she was somebody who was involved with science at the time. Sophia Bry, who was the sister of Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer, and she was a horticulturalist. And she was trained by her older brother in chemistry and horticulture and taught herself astronomy by studying books in German. So Isabella Cortez is another person of note during this time, an Italian alchemist, which is another word for chemist, but at the time they were called alchemists, who was able to manipulate nature in order to create several medicinal, alchemical, and cosmetic secrets or experiments. And basically, she was a chemist, and she actually was somebody who was able to publish some of her work. Maria Winkleman is another one of these early pioneers of women. She was an astronomer, and because of this, one of the first astronomers to really notice the relationship between the planets and the sun and the movements across the sky. And she made a lot of contributions when it comes to the discovery of comets and various types of celestial bodies. But as a woman with no university degree, she was denied a post at the academy. They feared that having a woman at the academy might establish a bad example. They said mouths would agape, so they would not she would not be able to advance her studies. Marion was another founder of modern botany and zoology who lived in the 17th century into the 18th century. And she was very young. She began growing caterpillars and studying the metamorphosis of caterpillars into butterflies and became a botanist and an entomologist and known for her illustrations and um, her discovery of plant lives. And I found this really very cool video, courtesy of the BBC Royal Society partnership. Ironically, finally the Royal Society, I guess, came around. But this was about her studies. She would travel to South America and Suriname with her daughters. And she had to cut the journey off early because one of her daughters got sick. But this animation, which I thought was really cool, picks it up right around that time and shows you some of her work, of which you can see here, which is, I think, very familiar. I think most people have seen her illustrations. They're still used in many books.
The jungles of Suriname were a naturalist's paradise, teeming with species that would later be documented in Marion's groundbreaking work, The Metamorphosis of the Insects of Suriname, published in 1705. Its stunning illustrations depicted stages of development of Suriname's voracious caterpillars and vibrant butterflies, as well as many other creatures from this exotic habitat. Uniquely for the time, she also portrayed insects surrounded by the plants they relied on, revealing their relationship to the wider ecosystem. She was the first to show that the change from caterpillar to butterfly depended on a number of plants. Though she had planned to stay longer, Marion's adventure was cut short by illness, and after 2 years she returned to Amsterdam. Given the challenges of working in a humid and unfamiliar environment, it is remarkable how many species she was able to observe and catalogue in that time. Her writing is also notable for acknowledging the mistreatment of enslaved Indigenous and African people and their contribution to her research. She wrote in her description of the peacock flower, "The Indians, who are not treated well by their Dutch masters, use the seeds to abort their children so that they will not become slaves like themselves." Marion suffered a stroke in 1715 that left her unable to work. She died 2 years later, aged 69. However, Marion's legacy has endured. To date, at least 6 plants, 9 butterflies, 2 bugs, a spider, and a lizard have been named after her. Despite being over 300 years old, her work on the biodiversity of Suriname is still valued by scientists and could show us how some species may adapt to climate change.
Really, I think that's a very well produced animation right there. But overall, the scientific revolution really did little to change people's ideas about the nature of women and their ability to be equal with men in the capacity of not just science, but in society in general. Um, so Jackson Spielvogel, who's a historian, uh, notes that male scientists used the new science to spread the view that women were by nature inferior and subordinate to men and suited to play a domestic role as nurturing mothers. So, in a way, using pseudoscience or some kind of whatever you want to call it at the time, natural science, to actually suppress women, which is kind of ironic. So they faced a lot of these obstacles, and no woman was invited to either the Royal Society of London or the French Academy of Sciences until the 20th century. So most people in the 17th century viewed life, a life devoted to any kind of scholarship, as being at odds with their domestic duties as women. In the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, it still remained largely an amateur profession for women. Botany, as you saw just now, was considered popular and a fashionable activity, and one that was suitable to women. In the later 18th century and early 19th century, it was one of the most accessible areas of science that women could get involved with, both in England and North America. And botany and other sciences, even for women, would become more professionalized. And that being the case, women were increasingly excluded. So, the rise of salon culture in Europe brought philosophers and their conversations, I'm sorry, to an intimate setting where men and women met to discuss political and social and scientific topics. And there were women who were sometimes involved in these discussions, and Lady Montagu was one of them. And she actually was instrumental in finding a smallpox inoculation. So that was someone who had a huge contribution, and she found it during her travels to the Ottoman Empire. She had to publish it under a pseudonym, which would actually continue until the 20th century, where women had to either use pseudonyms or basically pretend to be men in some cases. So into the 18th century, Maria Agnesi is an Italian mathematician and philosopher and theologian and humanitarian, really the first woman to write a mathematics handbook and the first woman appointed as a mathematics professor at a university. And according to Encyclopedia Britannica, considered to be the first woman in the Western world to have achieved a reputation in mathematics. And the astronomer Caroline Herschel, again, somebody whose brother was very well known, William Herschel. So she was his assistant, and he was an astronomer as well. And she, throughout her writings, made it clear that she really desired to earn an independent wage and be able to support herself without having to rely on her brother. So, women were getting fed up with being second fiddle, even though sometimes their siblings were giving them opportunities that other women didn't have because they didn't have uh, siblings who were that esteemed. But she did discover many heavenly bodies. She discovered eight comets, the first one in 1786, and she eventually did get her due. And by the 19th century, the contributions of women were limited by their exclusion from scientific institutions and education, higher education, but they began to be recognized through their occasional admittance into societies at this period. And by the early 20th century in the United States and in Britain, the founding of women's colleges provided really for the first time a path for women scientists to actually study and become part of the scientific community. So Mary Somerville carried out experiments in magnetism, and she was a Scottish scientist, and her paper, "The Magnetic Properties of the Violet Rays of the Solar Spectrum," was presented in 1826, and the second woman to present to the Royal Society. And she also wrote several mathematical, astronomical, and physical and geographical texts and was a strong advocate for women's education. And she and Caroline Herschel were the first members to be elected as honorary members of the Royal Astronomical Society. There she is on a coin there, and I believe she actually discovered this. This is I think a moon crater that was named after Caroline Herschel. Ada Lovelace was a mathematician and a pupil of Charles Babbage, who was credited with first coming up with the idea of the computer. So she foresaw wide applications for a general purpose computer, even beyond what Babbage really thought. And she's been credited with being the first person to ever write a computer program, although this has been disputed. But on the left there, you see a diagram from what was called Note G, which was the first published computer algorithm that Lovelace created. On the right, there is the analytical engine, which was the first computer concept, which was a mechanical device that would later be used as sort of a foundational idea for Alan Turing's Turing machine, which was really the foundation of modern computers. So some names we would probably start to begin to recognize now. Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was really a statistician and the founder of modern nursing. So she really did a lot of research into the efficiency, the idea of creating a higher order of management for the nursing profession to be basically able to take care of more people. So she really trained a lot of nurses during the Crimean War, and she organized care for wounded soldiers at Constantinople and used her analysis in graphical forms to ease drawing conclusions and actionable, what are called actionables, I guess, things you can do from data. So she's also famous for using the polar area diagram, also called the Nightingale Rose diagram, which is the equivalent to a modern histogram, and it's still used in the visualization of data today. This is from a Henry Wadsworth Longfellow 1957 poem. Lo, in that house of misery, a lady with a lamp I see pass through the glimmering gloom and flit from room to room. And he was talking about Florence Nightingale. Margaret Ann Bulke, who was actually went under the pseudonym James Barry, had to pass as a man to become the first woman to gain a medical qualification in Britain in 1812. So again, not just pseudonyms, but literally having to pass as a man and pass themselves off as someone that they weren't to be able to practice medicine. Elizabeth Anderson was the first openly female Briton to qualify medically in 1865. A couple of others would later become trained physicians at the London School of Medicine in the late 1800s. So, moving into the 20th century, Maria Mitchell became the first internationally known American woman to work as both a professional astronomer and a professor of astronomy after accepting a position at Vassar College in 1865. So, again, the idea that women have a place of higher education really did help open the doors for a lot of women to become accepted in the academic community. And she was the first woman ever elected to the Fellow of American Academy as a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And she discovered a comet too. In the late 19th century, the United States, really the rise of jobs and opportunities through education. Women's colleges really were very important in this. So there are only about 3,000 women in institutions like this in 1875, but by 1900, that number was almost 20,000. Marie Curie was a Polish and naturalized French physicist, well known for her research in radioactivity, and she has an element named after her. She's the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the first woman to win a Nobel, the first person to win a Nobel Prize twice, and the only person to win a Nobel Prize in two scientific fields. So that she was very obviously well known, and her work was foundational for our understanding of radioactivity. And she discovered radium and polonium, which ultimately led to her death and her cancer, unfortunately. So here's a short video about Marie Curie.
Marie Curie was a pioneer in the field of radiation research and the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in two different categories.
Marie Curie was a towering scientific intellect in a Victorian era when opportunities for women and opportunities for women academically especially were extremely few and far between.
Marie Curie was born Maria Sklodowska in Warsaw, Poland on November 7, 1867, to a family of prominent educators.
She had to study underground because she wasn't able to be accepted into the men-only University of Warsaw. She then had to leave the country to get her PhD. She was the first woman to receive a PhD degree from a French university.
She came to Paris for her education and met Pierre Curie.
Marie shared lab space with fellow scientist Pierre Curie. They were married in 1895 and had 2 daughters, Irene and Eve. Marie trained Irene to be her assistant, and in 1935, Irene won a Nobel Prize as well.
Marie Curie and her husband began studying the radiation and the properties of uranium.
Marie and Pierre's main discoveries were the ability to isolate the radioactive elements, which came from the uranium-based ore called pitchblende. They discovered 2 new radioactive elements, radium and polonium, which is named for Marie's country of birth, Poland.
In 1903, Marie and Pierre were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, along with Professor Henri Becquerel. Marie was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize.
Curie and her husband were absolutely single-minded in the pursuit of their research. In fact, when they were awarded the Nobel Prize, they refused to go and accept the prize personally because it would interfere with their research.
Pierre Curie died from a horse carriage accident in 1906. Despite this loss, Marie continued their work and was offered her husband's teaching position, becoming the first female professor at the Sorbonne.
Curie's research was key in understanding the effects of radioactivity and in quantifying those effects on living cells. She really established the field of radiation therapy for cancer.
Marie Curie made history again when she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1911. She was the first woman to win 2 Nobel Prizes.
It was through Curie's research that medical use of X-rays became really a possibility.
During the First World War, Marie Curie herself carried many portable X-ray pieces of equipment to the front lines to help the wounded.
Curie founded the Radium Institute to continue her research. Due to her prolonged exposure to radiation, she contracted leukemia and died in 1934.
Marie Curie is such a role model, especially for a woman in science. The impact of her work, the scientific integrity, and the drive that she had is truly an inspiration to all of us today.
Yeah, definitely an inspiration not only to women but to all of us. Somebody who would sacrifice their life basically for the study of something so important, which has affected millions of people. Emily Noether was another fascinating person, a German mathematician who made many contributions to abstract algebra. Noether's first and second theorems are fundamental to mathematical physics. Albert Einstein described her as one of the most important women in the history of mathematics. And her theorem explains the connection between symmetry and conservation laws. So it's a little bit technical, so you're not going to get too much into it, but she was very important. Rosalind Franklin is a fascinating, somebody who was really kind of not given her just due for her contribution. She's best known for working on X-ray diffraction images of DNA while working with Watson and Francis Crick and James Watson, who would discover the DNA double helix and won the Nobel Prize for Physiology in Medicine in 1962. So you see the image that she was responsible for, and she really was kind of not given her credit that she should have been given. Here's a little video about Rosalind Franklin.
In 1962, scientists James Watson and Francis Crick famously won a Nobel Prize for a discovery that would change the world. That discovery was that DNA, the molecule that carries the genetic code underlying every living thing, is composed of 2 chains that twist around each other to form a double helix. But part of what made that groundbreaking research possible was a photograph taken a decade earlier by a young and somewhat obscure Jewish researcher named Rosalind Franklin. Franklin was a research fellow at King's College London, where she used her expertise in X-ray diffraction techniques to help piece together the puzzle of DNA's structure. Already in 1951, Franklin had collected data suggesting DNA had a helical structure, and the following year she had an image that proved it. The photo, which came to be known as Photo 51, became the stuff of scientific lore and enduring controversy. A fellow scientist at King's College, Maurice Wilkins, showed the photo to Watson, apparently without Franklin's knowledge. Together, with data from other sources, the photo helped solve the riddle of the double helix. Watson and Crick published their findings in Nature magazine in 1953. In 1962, Wilkins, Crick, and Watson were recognized internationally when they stood up to accept the Nobel Prize for their work in understanding DNA. Tragically, Franklin had died of cancer 4 years earlier at the age of 37, and her contribution was all but forgotten. At the cemetery where Franklin is buried in London, the tombstone reads, "In memory of Rosalind Elsie Franklin. Her research and discoveries on viruses remain of lasting benefit to mankind."
Yeah, and don't worry, there'll be plenty of women who are going to also win Nobel Prizes in as we go along in this lecture. But this is another fascinating story. Some of these whole movies are based around, so I'm going to try to show you clips if I have a chance. But this is a really fascinating story. If you like this type of stuff, I mean, this was Elizabeth Friedman. She was a cryptanalyst, basically a code breaker. So she worked for deciphering enemy codes during both world wars and helped solve a lot of international smuggling cases during Prohibition. And she worked for everyone, the U.S. Treasury, the Coast Guard, Navy, Army, and even the International Monetary Fund. And she was actually hired by somebody to try to prove that Sir Francis Bacon had written Shakespeare's texts, Shakespeare's plays and sonnets. And the work was basically used, would involve decrypting and ciphered messages that were supposedly contained within the plays and poems. It was never proven, and this is kind of one of those tall tales that goes back a long way. There was a William Shakespeare who actually lived and he wrote those plays. So, but here's again from PBS's American Experience. PBS is just a great source of everything, whether it's American Masters or American Experience, or all these Ken Burns documentaries. It's one of my favorite sources. So this is from American Experience on PBS.
She was a suburban mom, but she lived a double life.
She had the ability to see beyond what most other people could.
She was a code-breaking Quaker poet who hunted Nazi spies. And with the invention of radio, the world's secrets are flying through the ether.
The United States had no code-breaking agency. There was no NSA, there was no CIA.
She figured out methods of solving secret messages that had never been imagined before.
She's being asked to break codes for the United States military in a world war. This is as deep as on-the-job training gets.
She begins the development of strategic intelligence. She was really visionary.
The Germans have no idea that the spy ring was broken up because their codes have been broken.
One of the headlines in a story that she appeared in was "Solved by Woman."
They don't talk about her ability to break these codes. They talk about how she's this dainty little woman.
Elizabeth's story remained untold for so long, mainly because of sexism and secrecy.
And if we could miss something as big as Elizabeth, who else are we missing?
So I would encourage you, if you can get PBS streaming, if you do contribute to PBS, they have most of these either on their streaming service or on their website. But you could probably also get this from the library. These videos, these are all PBS. So Maria Mayer was a theoretical physicist and Nobel laureate in physics. She proposed the idea of the nuclear shell model of the atomic nucleus, and she was the second woman to win a Nobel Prize. And she was in 1986. She was the award was named after for her early career for women in physics was established in her honor. And she wrote her doctoral thesis on the theory of possible two-photon absorption by atoms. And at the time, the chances of experimentally verifying this thesis was remote, but the development of lasers in the 1960s later permitted it. And today, was confirmed by now, and it's named after her. So there's somebody else of great importance. Actually, I'm going to skip this video because I just want to move into some more. I want to get into the 21st century if I could. This is a woman who lived a very, very long life, and she lived into the 20th century, although she was born in 1909. An Italian neurobiologist who was awarded in 1986 with the Nobel Prize in Physiology, Rita Montaloncini, and she became the first Nobel laureate in 2009 to reach the age of 100. So here's from the Nobel Prize website. All right, and another really fascinating figure was Rachel Carson, an American marine biologist and writer and conservationist. She wrote a very influential book called Silent Spring, and this was actually one of the books that was credited with kind of creating the environmental movement, the modern environmental movement, um, and really made a lot of people aware of some of the environmental situation that was happening at the time, the use of certain pesticides and these types of things, and really inspired a grassroots movement that influenced the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which I think actually now is gone, unfortunately. I mean, it's not funny, but I think that they got rid of it under the current administration, if I'm not mistaken, but or at least they wanted to. But whatever, if they did or they didn't, they're definitely not taking it as seriously as Carson would have liked. And she was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Carter posthumously. So here's a quick, again, from American Experience on PBS about Rachel Carson.
She was the solitary sort of girl who greeted the birds on the way to school in the morning and was partial to the companionship of books. At the age of 8, she was writing stories of her own. At 10, at her mother's urging, Rachel entered a contest sponsored by the popular children's magazine St. Nicholas and became a published author. By 14, she was submitting her work to magazines for sale.
If we picture a girl in a small farm in nowhere, Pennsylvania, who is transported through literature and can imagine being elsewhere, I think she was led to see that as something that she could do, and it was constantly reinforced.
Maria Carson had always wanted to go to college and couldn't. So she was going to be quite sure that this daughter, this smart daughter, was going to go to college.
When Rachel won a scholarship to Pennsylvania College for Women, Maria sold off even the family china to help cover her daughter's expenses, then made the 30-mile round trip to Pittsburgh most weekends to visit her.
She was the star pupil. Everyone realized right away what a talented writer she was, and also saw that this was her ambition in life, that she wanted to be a writer. So it came as a great shock when she fell in love with biology. The science of life just struck a chord in her that I think she didn't realize was there.
Thrilled by the prospect of understanding the natural world she'd been taught to so closely observe, Carson changed her major from English to biology and announced her intention to go on to graduate school. She spent the next 2 years taking courses in zoology, physiology, anatomy. But her true interest only revealed itself after graduation, when she landed a coveted research spot at the Marine Biology Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and for the first time in her life, laid eyes on the ocean.
This is part of a very broad documentary. American Experience does a great job of telling these stories, and this is just a small clip of it. Um, but some stories become very the stuff of Hollywood movies. Katherine Johnson being one of them, an American mathematician whose calculations of orbital mechanics helped NASA in their space flights. And she had a 33 year career at NASA, and she was a master at complex manual calculations. She was actually they were called computers. They didn't really have computers. They had people like Katherine Johnson doing the computation. And the space agency NASA has noted that her historical role, not only as a woman, but as the first African American woman as to work as a NASA scientist. And this was covered in a great film called Hidden Figures. And she was one of the few. There were three main characters, all African American women who were involved. Mary Jackson, Dorothy Vaughan were the other two. And this is a quick clip from this film about her struggling to find acceptance in this world, which was all very white male driven. Just this scene for context, she has to go to another building to use the bathroom, and that is Kevin Costner as her boss at NASA.
Need you to be. It's not my imagination. Now, where the hell do you go every day?
To the bathroom, sir.
To the bathroom. To the damn bathroom. For 40 minutes a day? What are you doing there? We're T-minus zero here. I put a lot of faith in you.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. And I can't use one of the handy bikes. Picture that, Mr. Harrison. My uniform, skirt below my knees, my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. Lord knows you don't pay colored enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog, day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch. Excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day.
Uh, Me being a film guy, I'm gonna have to get a couple of movie clips in here during this lecture. You know that. But continuing with some of these incredible women, Barbara McClintock, who is an American cytogeneticist and was given a Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine in 1983. She studied chromosomes and how they work to change during reproduction in maize or corn, and developed techniques for visualizing maize chromosomes using microscopic analysis to demonstrate many fundamental genetic ideas. So she was a great geneticist. And so she actually accepted a position in my neck of the woods here on Long Island at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in 1944, and was the third woman to be elected to the National Academy of Sciences. Sally Ride, this is a pretty famous person in American history. She was an astronaut and physicist and became the first woman to ever, first American woman to fly in space. There were two other Russian cosmonauts at that point who had flown in space, but she was the first American, really was considered an American hero. And Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first woman to be in space, was a Russian engineer. So these are two space pioneers who are of note. I'm not going to show the clip about this because I want to move on to some more. I got to get to actually what's going on this century before. But no, one more movie clip. Joanne Clark. It was an English cryptanalyst, and she was a code breaker essentially during World War II. And she didn't necessarily seek the spotlight. She was actually working in secret on the Enigma project, which was tasked with decrypting the German Enigma programming, which was considered an unbreakable code maker. And she worked with Alan Turing to help create the Turing machine that would eventually break this code. And this was made into a film called The Imitation Game. And Benedict Cumberbatch was really the star of the film, played Alan Turing. But Keira Knightley played Clark in this film, and this is a great scene where they're coming to work. They don't know what they're working on because it's so top secret, but they're basically giving these people tests to find out who can be the best code breakers in all of Britain at this point. So they're all men, obviously, until she shows up.
All sorts, really. Teacher, an engineer, a handful of students.
And you think they're qualified for Bletchley because they're good at crossword puzzles?
Well, they say they're good, and now we shall find out, won't we? In order to aid your efforts, there is to the right of you a green scratch card book. You are to make notes in that. Gentlemen, you have 6 minutes in which to complete the puzzle, at which point I will...
Pardon, Mum, this room's restricted.
Oh, apologies for my tardiness. The bus caught a flat tire.
May I continue, please? Thank you.
You're not allowed in here, Mum.
Oh, but I'm only a few minutes late and...
The secretaries are to head upstairs. This room's for the candidates.
May I get on with this now, please?
I am a candidate.
For what position?
The letter didn't say precisely.
Yes, those secretaries are to head upstairs.
It did say that it was top secret.
What is going on?
I solved a crossword puzzle in the newspaper, and I got this letter saying that I was a candidate for some sort of mysterious job. My name's Joan Clark.
Miss, did you really solve this puzzle yourself?
What makes you think I couldn't solve the puzzle myself? I'm really very
Mum,
good at...
I'll have to ask you to...
Miss Clark, I find tardiness under any circumstance unacceptable. Take a seat so that we may continue.
Thank you.
Now, as I was saying, you have 6 minutes to complete the task in front of you. Gentleman and lady, begin.
Is that even possible?
No. It takes me 8. This isn't about crossword puzzles. It's about how one approaches solving an impossible problem. Do you tackle the whole thing at once or divide it into small? You finished?
Yes.
Five minutes and 34 seconds.
You said to do it in under 6.
Congratulations. My warmest welcome to His Majesty's service. If you speak a word of what I'm about to show you, you will be executed for high treason. You will lie to your friends, your family, and everyone you meet about what it is you really do.
And what is it that we're really doing?
We're going to break an unbreakable Nazi code and win the war.
Oh.
And that they did. Now, a couple of other people who have films after them, and one of them is Diane Fossey, whose story was made into a film, Gorillas in the Mist, where she was played by Sigourney Weaver. She was a primatologist, and she worked with gorillas. Another very famous primatologist who we lost last year, which I'm going to talk about probably then to end the lecture, is Jane Goodall. Both of them worked with paleoanthropologist Louis Leakey, who, sort of in his he was a leading researcher in this field, and her research did a lot to help conservation and reduce, in terms of the downward population trend for mountain gorillas and all the deforestation that was going on with that. I'm not gonna. I would like. I gotta show you a little bit of this. You got gorillas here. There was a very fascinating documentary that National Geographic shot about her, and it really is worth checking out. This is just sort of some clips from it.
We leave civilization behind us and go into the heartland of the mountains.
So the film covers her life, but this is the actual documentary that she made with National Geographic in the wild with the gorillas, and that's just crazy. It was just the idea of her
To
being.
build a nest may take up to 5 minutes. Carefully selected vines and stalks are bent in around the animal's body to make a good rim. The younger animals seem to have a bit of trouble with foliage that seems to have a mind of its own.
But just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. This is just a clip from Gorillas in the Mist, where she is being played by Sigourney Weaver, and they're actually covering this documentary in the film. So just to give you an idea, this is a little meta. But I want to move on. Just one other person here I want to make mention of, Grace Hopper, who is a Navy admiral, but also a computer scientist and mathematician. Very, very important in terms of the creation of computer programming. She was one of the original programmers of Harvard's Mark I computer and a pioneer of computer programming. She's a very important person in terms of the world we live in today. And here's a quick little video about her being honored and her life.
Grace Murray Hopper, the grandmother of computer programming, was born on December 9th, 1906. She attended Vassar College, graduating in 1928 with a degree in math and physics. After graduating, she accepted a position as an assistant professor at Vassar, which would help her pay her way through Yale, where she received both a master's and a PhD in mathematics. Satisfied with 3 math degrees under her belt, Hopper went back to Vassar, now as a full-time professor. She spent the next 10 years molding young minds. And then World War II broke out. Hopper wanted to do her part in the war effort, so she applied for the WAVES program, which stood for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. It was basically the first program that expanded women's wartime roles beyond nursing and administrative duties. And in 1943, she was accepted to WAVES and joined the U.S. Naval Reserve. She was then assigned to work on the MARC series of computers at Harvard. The Mark I was one of the first electromechanical computers used in war efforts and the first of its kind produced in the United States. While working on the Mark II, Hopper discovered an unusual glitch. One day, the computer inexplicably shorted out due to a moth stuck in the hardware. The bug was removed, and Hopper referred to this solution as debugging the computer. Finally, in 1952, she revolutionized computer programming as we know it. She and her team invented the first compiler, a program that converted common sense commands into binary computer language. This blew the doors off computer programming. Every subsequent programming language is built on her work, and it's no exaggeration to say that we owe computer programming as we know it to Hopper. At 60, Hopper retired from the Navy with more than 2 decades of naval service under her belt. But her retirement didn't last long. Less than a year later, Uncle Sam came calling again, asking her to come back to standardize COBOL for the Navy. Always the dutiful patriot, Hopper returned to active service for another 20 years. Grace Hopper died on January 1st, 1992. In her later life, when asked what her greatest accomplishment was, Hopper was known to respond, "All of the young people I've trained."
Yeah, really amazing when you think about our world today, how important she was for creating the language of binary, which is the foundation of all computer language. So, coming into the 21st century, some modern pioneers of women in the sciences, in medicine and life sciences. You have some incredible women here. Catalin Carioco, who was awarded the 2023 Nobel Prize in Physiology for her mRNA research, which led to the COVID-19 vaccines. You have Nita Tandon, a biomedical engineer and CEO of a company that is the first to successfully grow living human bones for skeletal reconstruction. Tu Youyou, who was a pharmaceutical chemist and received the 2015 Nobel Prize in Physiology for a breakthrough discovery and treatment that saved millions from malaria. Cynthia Kenyon, a leading molecular biologist, for coming up with focusing on genetics of aging and pathways to extend human life. And then in terms of physics and space exploration, Andrea Ghez, who in 2020 won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of a supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which is kind of a big deal. And here you have a few others. It's really good to see so many Nobel Prize winners in the 21st century are women. And a couple of other very important women in mathematics and technology. Miriam Mitskani, who was the first woman to win the prestigious Fields Medal in 2014 for her work in the dynamics and geometry of Riemann surfaces, which is it's kind of a technical term, but Sophie Wilson, also a pioneer in computer architecture, whose early work with the ARM, which was the precursor, the foundation of the chips that power most modern smartphones in the 21st century. And also for chemistry and ecology, Frances Arnold received a 2018 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her work in the directed evolution of enzymes, a method used to create environmentally friendly chemical substances for everything from biofuels to pharmaceuticals. And Carolyn Bertozzi, who won in 2022 for developing a chemistry which allows researchers to perform chemical reactions inside living cells without damaging them. And finally, we get to Jane Goodall, who is a primatologist who worked with chimpanzees for 60 years. And we lost her last year. She was a very important woman, obviously, in the history of women's science, and her work is well documented. And she is there she is with that's actually not a chimpanzee, but you get it. So we did lose Jane Goodall last year, but she was one of a long line of women that I hope I've enlightened you about in this lecture. We have a couple of minutes. If you guys have any questions, it's almost 8 o'clock. So I'm going to pretty much round it out right now and say thank you very much for joining me tonight.